Okay, so this morning, as I usually do on the second day, rather than giving a formal sermon, I'm going to teach a text. I would like to dedicate this teaching. I'd like to dedicate this teaching to the memory of Hayyim Katsman, who was murdered on October 7th at his kibbutz Holy. And part of this text I taught a couple of weeks ago at the board meeting, but I didn't teach all of it. I certainly didn't have time. This text was taught as part of a study day in memory of Hayyim Katsman by his mother, Wacholder Katsman. And she said that the reason she taught this text was because it actually reminded her of her son. It is about how to live together when there are serious disagreements. Now, in the case of Hayyim Katsman, he was raised in Jerusalem. He was born in the States, but he was raised in Jerusalem in a modern Orthodox family and eventually became secular. And Hannah said that as a teenager, he was difficult. I mean, he wasn't bad, but he was rebellious, okay? And he was hard for her to deal with him. But conflict, not that he had like by nature, a conflictual nature, but Hayyim Katsman had a PhD in political science from the University of Washington, and his subject was how religion caused conflict in the Middle East, okay? Nothing to study there, right? How religion causes conflict in the Middle East. But I want to talk for a minute about Hannah Katzman's father, so Hayyim Katzman's grandfather. His name was Rabbi Dr. Ben-Sion Wacholder. He was one of my professors in rabbinical school. And in retrospect, he's really one of the most remarkable people I ever met. Ben-Sion Wacholder was born in Poland, and he studied in the yeshivot, the elite yeshivot, the Ivy League yeshivot, if you will, in Eastern Europe. He survived the Holocaust by pretending to be a Polish Gentile. After the Holocaust, he came to the States. He got his ordination as an Orthodox rabbi at Yeshiva University, then moved to LA, got a PhD in classics at UCLA, and then joined the faculty of Hebrew Union College, but he never ceased to be an observant Orthodox Jew, even though he was teaching at a Reform seminary. And as he got older, he lost his eyesight till he became almost completely blind. There were all kinds of rumors at HUC among the students that this was somehow connected to his experiences during the Holocaust. I don't know for sure. But, I mean, you hear these stories sometimes about people with yeshiva backgrounds that you could take a volume of the Talmud and stick a pin through a page and they could tell you what word it went through on every page in the rest of the book, okay? And Professor Wacholder was one of those people, okay? But he also, I mean, he was probably the only person, well, I don't know, maybe Shaul Lieberman at JTS was like that too, who knew like all of rabbinic literature by heart, but also knew the Greek and Latin classics by heart. And he had to know them by heart because he was, by the middle of his adulthood, he was blind, right? But so, because he was blind and he would teach a Talmud class, and he wouldn't bring in the tractate, right? And so some students complained to him that they felt that he was disrespecting them by not bringing in the book, the tractate, and he was the kind of person, like, if you said that, he would, so the next day, he brought in, the next class, he brought in the Talmudic tractate and opened it on his desk, and after class, one of the students went and looked, and it was the wrong tractate, and it was upside down. But he cared about the feelings of his students, but he didn't need it, and he couldn't see it anyway, right? So what would have been the point? But one of the most remarkable things that he did was that Ben-Zion Wacholder was the scholar who broke the Dead Sea Scrolls monopoly. Okay, now, what is that? Okay, so most of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? The Dead Sea Scrolls, unfortunately for the scholarly world, were discovered 47, 48. Okay? There were other things going on in Eretz Yisrael at the time, so a couple of them were bought by, they weren't Israelis yet, right? They were Palestinians. We were the Palestinians in 47 and 48. They were bought by Professor Eliezer Sukenik, who was the father of General Yigael Yadin. But most of them ended up in the Rockefeller Museum, which was in East Jerusalem, so part of Jordan. And the Jordanians gave a monopoly on access to the scrolls, even photocopies, even facsimiles, to a handful of scholars that they had selected, none of whom were Jewish, one of whom it was discovered at about the same time that Wacholder broke the monopoly in the late 80s, I think it was, John Strugnell from Harvard, a great scholar of Bible, but a vicious anti-Semite, okay? And all of the people who had access were Christian Bible scholars who didn't know rabbinic literature, right? Like Wacholder did. But they published a concordance, right? They would not allow access to the scrolls or the facsimiles of the scrolls, but they published a concordance. What is a concordance? It is all of the words that appear in a certain text and where they appear, right? So if you want to, and I don't know, is there such a thing as a legal concordance? But, it's like you can look a Bible concordance, like if you want to know where is every instance of the word love in the Bible, you get a concordance and you can find that. So they published a concordance, and essentially Wacholder and one of his grad students, they took this concordance and they reverse engineered the scrolls from the concordance, because he had such a mind and such a memory that by having this concordance, he could reconstruct the text of the scrolls, okay? And when he published that reconstruction, the Rockefeller Museum, which remember was now under Israeli control, but they had decided not to rock the boat and continue the monopoly for the scholar who had it. But so the scholar, when he published it, and the people who had access said, he's right. He's right. There's no point in preserving our monopoly access to the scrolls anymore. So, remarkable thing, and that's why, you know, if you want to get the text of the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can probably buy it on Amazon. You can probably find a bootleg PDF of it on Google, right? But that was the work of Ben-Zion Wacholder. Oh, one last story about Wacholder, and then I may get to this text eventually. When I was in my last year of rabbinical school, I took a course in modern Jewish intellectual history that was taught in Hebrew, and we only used text in Hebrew, okay? And so it was a very small class because there weren't that many of us who could actually handle, right? I mean, it's one thing to be able to handle Hebrew text. It's another thing to be able to handle a course taught in Hebrew, right? So we were reading the intellect, what is the word I'm looking for? The ethical will of the Hatam Sofer. Okay, lived in the mid-1800s in what's now Czechoslovakia, and there was a word in that document that we were reading that nobody knew what it meant, including the professor, okay, who, may he live long, he's still with us. I won't say his name, but eminent history of modern Judaism. Didn't know the meaning of this word. Nobody in the class knew it. We met once a week for 3 hours. I said, I'll find out. I'll give you the definition at the next class. All right. I gave the definition at the next class, and it made sense, and yeah, that's probably what it means. Remember, I mean, this is before Google, right? This is 1986, right? So I found out, and so the professor said, okay, it's one thing that you found out, but it's another thing that you didn't know what it means, but you promised that you would find out what it means. How did you find out? I said, I asked Professor Wacholder, right? And so, as I said in something I wrote about him after he passed away, he was my Google before there was a Google. Right? Truly remarkable, and I really can't get over the fact, like, it bothers me that he survived the Holocaust only for his grandson to be murdered in Israel because he was a Jew. Right? So anyway, so this is dedicated to the memory of Ben-Zion Wacholder and Hayyim Katsman. So it's from the Talmud Eruvin 13b. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Shmuel, for 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed, right? These are the two main schools of thought in Jerusalem, roughly contemporaneous with Jesus, and each said the halakha is in accordance with our opinion, and so after 3 years of arguing, a divine voice emerged and proclaimed, Elu ve'elu divrei Elohim Hayyim, both are the words of the living God, the halakha keveit Hillel. But the halakha, the law, is according to Beit Hillel, right? They're both divinely inspired, but the law is according to Hillel, and then the Gemara goes on and asks why, right? If they're both divrei Elohim Hayyim, right? They're both the words of the living God. Why is the law according to Beit Hillel? And the reason is they were agreeable and forbearing, right? They weren't nasty people, right? When they were insulted, when they were criticized, they showed restraint, okay? And when they taught, they would teach their opinion as well as the opinion of Beit Shammai, and when they were doing so, they would teach the opinion of Beit Shammai before their own, right? So now, notice, it has nothing to do with who's objectively correct, right? It doesn't say the halakha is according to Beit Hillel because they're right. Doesn't say that. It says the halakha is according to Beit Hillel because of the way they participated in disagreements, right? Any comments or questions on this so far? Yeah, Joe.
Is there sort of implicit assumption that Shammai did not have these qualities?
Absolutely. Right, absolutely. So Joe asked, for those of you who are on Zoom or listening, is the implicit assumption that Beit Shammai did not have these qualities, right? And I'll get to you saying. And yes, absolutely the assumption is they did not have these qualities. Here's a story about Shammai himself from the Talmud. You probably may have heard the story about a non-Jew who wanted to convert, and they went to Hillel, and they said, I want to convert, but only on condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot, right? And Hillel responded, what is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. This is the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary, go and learn. Okay, what we don't teach, but before that pericope about Hillel, this poor guy went to Shammai. Okay, and Shammai was by trade a builder. Okay, and he had a yardstick. He happened to have a yardstick in his hand when this guy came to him. So Shammai whacked him over the head with the yardstick, right? And anybody who doesn't acknowledge that there have been times in their lives when you wished you had a yardstick so you could whack somebody over the head with it is lying, right? It's not wrong to feel that way. It's wrong to act that way, right? And so, yes, the implicit assumption, and beyond that, is that Shammai did not have these characteristics. Okay, Brian and then Lori, and then Dr. Comrat, and then that'll be it.
Could we understand it that Wacholder wasn't just being nice, they were being disingenuous by teaching Shammai first? Shammai says this, but the correct conclusion, the correct assumption is our holy posture.
Okay,
Is that possible? Do we think, or is that an interpretation?
Absolutely possible, right? So Brian says, is it possible that Beit Hillel was being disingenuous when they presented Shammai's argument first, right? They presented Shammai's argument first so that they could then demolish it. Okay? I mean, I think educationally, there's definitely value in what you say, right? And if you read, I don't know, let's say 165-page legal brief that was released within the last couple of days by Judge Tanya Chuck. Right, I mean, they print the arguments that the other side made, and then they demolish them, right? So there's certainly value in what you're saying. I wouldn't call it disingenuous. That's where I disagree. Right? I mean, absolutely. If you're going to really learn something, you have to know both sides, right? And if you're in a debate, right, you have to know what your opponent is saying. And if you're teaching it, you have to be able to give over both sides. I wouldn't call that disingenuous. I would call that actually like sound educational practice. But other than that, yes, I think you're right. Your next word, yeah.
What strikes me, this kind of tied into me from what you were saying yesterday. Do you want to be right or do you want a relationship?
Yeah.
In the sense that, you know, they know may know they're right, but they're looking at the bigger picture in the sense of, well, we'll get the biblical properties and then we'll continue, you know. But we know in the end.
Right, absolutely. I mean, right, it is absolutely connected with what I said at the end of my Rosh yesterday. Do you want to be right or do you want to preserve the relationship? Right, and clearly, you know, as I said several times, in that disagreement with my dad, frankly, there should be no doubt in anybody's mind that I was right. I was right, and I will go to my grave insisting that I was right, but in the end, right, it was more important to preserve the relationship, right? And that's why Hillel acted the way they did. They never gave up, you know, on believing that they were right, but it was more important to maintain not even the unity, right? Because ultimately, a decision has to be made, right? But the comity within the community. Yeah.
Often in my work with patients, I emphasize the differences between form and content, or ideas and process. Pointing out, for example, that in the law, due process may actually be one of the most important things. How you do things.
Right.
In fact, you can lose the case by not following appropriate due process, even though the principle, the legal principle, would be the principle. And similarly in human relations, what you say is important, but equally important and sometimes more important is how you say it.
Right.
And I think that's what's being illustrated.
Right, what you say is important, but how you say it is equally as important. Okay, did I say that somebody else would have a turn and then skip them? No, okay. So we'll quickly go on to the last section of this because it's related to the high holidays, okay? So the sages taught for 2.5 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed. These say, the first these is Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai says it would have been preferable had man not been created than to have been created. Okay, so that's Shammai, right? It would have been better if we hadn't been created, right? And the Hillel said, no, it's better that we were created, okay? And they disagreed over that for 2.5 years, and then they took a vote, and Shammai kind of won, right? They came to this conclusion. It would have been preferable had man not been created than to have been created. However, now that he has been created, he should examine his actions that he has performed and seek to correct them. And some say he should scrutinize his planned actions and evaluate whether or not and in what manner those actions should be performed so that he will not sin, right? So in other words, yeah, it would have been better, and certainly it would have been better for the planet Earth, although this is a couple thousand years ago, had we not been created, okay? But so what, right? We're here, right? And, you know, I mean, to relate this to other things, right? We could have a board meeting and somebody says, remember 10 years ago when we decided X instead of Y, and if we had only decided Y, none of these problems that we're facing now would exist, right? Okay, as I often say to somebody, right? Give me a solution that does not involve the use of a time machine, right? And if you can't give me a solution that does not involve the use of a time machine, then your statement has no value. It may have merit, but it has no value, right? Because we can't fix a mistake that we made 10 years ago. But we're here now, right? We're here now. What do we do now, right? So yeah, it would have been better had we not been created, but here we are, and I'll close, and this time I'm really going to close. Poem by Yehuda Amichai. Amichai was, by consensus, the greatest poet of modern Israel, passed away about 25 years ago. It's called The Place Where We Are Right. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. All right, so we're here now. Let's be less right and more compassionate to each other. Chag Sameach.
Rosh Hashanah.